The first time I noticed the footsteps, I blamed the house. That's the sort of thing people say about old houses, isn't it? They settle, they breathe, they remember. Mine certainly remembered. The house had belonged to my great-aunt Eleanor, though no one in the family ever seemed eager to talk about her for very long. When she died, the property passed quietly through enough reluctant hands that eventually it landed with me, mostly because no one else wanted the burden of maintaining a crumbling Victorian at the edge of a dying coastal town. I told myself I loved it immediately. That wasn't entirely true. I loved the idea of it. The tall windows, the widow's walk overlooking the sea, the dark green wallpaper faded silver with age, the way every room smelled faintly of dust, cedar, and rainwater. But love is different from comfort, and the house was never comforting. Even before the dreams began, there was always the sensation that I had interrupted something by moving in. Not danger, not malice, only presence. Sometimes at night, I would hear measured footsteps crossing the hallway outside my bedroom. Not the dramatic creaking people expect from ghost stories. These were softer than that, deliberate. The careful pacing of someone trying not to wake another person sleeping nearby. I would lie perfectly still beneath the blankets, listening. 4 steps, pause, 4 more, then silence. Once, I gathered enough courage to open the bedroom door. The hallway stood empty beneath the amber glow of the sconces, yet the air still carried the unmistakable scent of cigarette smoke and old cologne. Not modern cologne, something warmer, darker, like cedar and spice and burning paper. The smell lingered for only a moment before dissolving back into the cold. I slept with my bedroom door closed after that. It didn't help. Some mornings I'd wake to find it slightly open anyway. Other times I'd discover impressions in the velvet chair near the fireplace downstairs, as though someone had been sitting there moments before I entered the room. The strange thing was this: I never truly felt afraid. Uneasy, certainly. Observed, often, but not threatened. Loneliness can make company feel comforting, even when it shouldn't. And I had been lonely for a long time. I was 34 then, working remotely and living alone. I was recently out of a relationship that had ended not with cruelty or betrayal, but with exhaustion. The sort of ending that leaves no dramatic wound, only the slow realization that someone had stopped loving you months before either of you admitted it aloud. The house became my entire world very quickly. Rain against tall windows, books stacked in unstable towers, tea gone cold beside me at midnight. The days blurred together in muted shades of green and gray. And then I found the ring. It happened during a storm in late October. The attic had always unsettled me, not because it looked frightening, but because it felt preserved, as though someone had stepped out only briefly and might return at any moment. Trunks lined the sloped walls beneath sheets yellowed with age. Old portraits leaned face down against boxes of letters tied with ribbon. I remember kneeling beside a cedar chest near the far corner when I noticed the loose floorboard beneath it. The compartment underneath was shallow. Inside rested a small velvet box. For some reason, my first instinct was guilt, as though I were uncovering something private. The hinge gave a soft sigh when I opened it. Inside sat the ring. Even now I can still picture it with terrible clarity. Gold filigree, an oval ruby the color of dark wine, tiny diamonds surrounding it like drops of frozen rain. It was unmistakably antique. Beautiful in the sort of way modern jewelry rarely is. Delicate without seeming fragile. Intimate somehow. I touched it carefully. The metal was ice cold. Not cool from the attic air. Cold enough to make me pull my hand back instinctively. I remember laughing nervously to myself then, telling myself I was becoming dramatic from spending too much time alone. I carried the ring downstairs and placed it on a small porcelain trinket dish beside the kitchen sink. That night, I dreamed of him for the first time. At least, I think it was the first time. Sometimes now I wonder if the dreams had started long before I consciously remembered them. In the dream, I stood inside a ballroom illuminated entirely by candlelight. Music drifted softly through the room. Not eerie music. Not distorted. Just a piano somewhere beyond my sight. The air smelled faintly of roses and smoke. People moved around us in blurred silhouettes, indistinct as reflections on water. And there he was, tall, dark-haired, elegant without vanity. He wore black evening clothes from another century, perfectly tailored. His gloves rested loosely in one hand. He looked at me as though he already knew me. Not with surprise, with recognition. When he smiled, something inside me ached with impossible familiarity. I remember thinking, even in the dream, "There you are," which frightened me afterward far more than the dream itself, because it implied I had been waiting for him. He asked me to dance. I didn't hear his voice clearly in those early dreams, only the feeling of it. Warm, gentle, patient. His hand settled against my back as we moved through the candlelit room. The dream should have felt absurd. Instead, it felt more real than most of my waking life. When I woke the next morning, I could still smell his cologne faintly in my bedroom. And downstairs, the ring was no longer beside the kitchen sink. It sat neatly on my bedside table. I stared at it for a very long time. I told myself I must have moved it without remembering. That explanation should have satisfied me. It didn't. Still, I said nothing to anyone. What exactly was I supposed to say? I'm forgetting where I put things. I'm dreaming about a man who feels more emotionally real than anyone I've met in years. The dreams continued, every night, and each dream revealed a little more. A conservatory drenched in rain, a grand staircase lit by chandeliers, a library lined floor to ceiling in dark wood. Always him, always waiting for me, as though our meetings had been arranged long ago. Sometimes we danced. Other times we simply sat together beside a fireplace, while he spoke softly about things I could never fully remember upon waking. Yet the emotions remained. Longing, safety, devotion. The terrifying thing was how deeply loved I felt in those dreams. Not desired, known. As though he saw every lonely, unlovable part of me, and found it worthy anyway. You have to understand something. Loneliness changes the architecture of the mind. It hollows spaces inside you. And once something finally fills those spaces, even gently, you become willing to forgive almost anything. I began sleeping later each morning, then earlier each evening. The hours between dreams started feeling tedious and colorless by comparison. I stopped answering calls from friends right away. My sister texted twice asking if I was all right. I lied automatically, just tired, busy with work, settling into the house. Meanwhile, the house itself seemed to grow more awake. Music drifted faintly through distant rooms at night. Old jazz records, I thought at first, but when I followed the sound, it always faded before I reached it. Doors stood open after I distinctly remembered closing them. Mirrors became difficult to look at directly. Not because I saw anything horrifying, because sometimes I thought I saw movement just behind me. A dark figure crossing a doorway. The suggestion of someone standing in the hall. Never fully visible. Never enough certainty. One evening I found myself speaking aloud while making tea. I don't even remember what I said. Something casual. A comment about the weather, perhaps. But I froze afterward because the silence that followed felt occupied. Like someone listening. And somewhere upstairs, floorboards creaked softly in response. I finally decided to have the ring appraised in November, partly because I needed practical answers, partly because I wanted someone else to touch it, to confirm it was ordinary. The jewelry shop sat on a narrow side street downtown, between a bookstore and a florist. Old-fashioned enough that brass lettering still gleamed across the front window. Bell and Doyle Fine Jewelry. The owner introduced himself as Daniel Bell. He looked younger than I expected, late 30s perhaps. Quiet in the way some intelligent people are quiet, as though they prefer observing before speaking. He wore wire-rimmed glasses, and rolled shirt sleeves dusted faintly with polishing compound. When I handed him the ring, something in his expression changed. Not alarm, recognition. "Where did you get this?" he asked. His tone remained polite, but careful. "In my attic," I said lightly, which sounds ominous now that I hear it out loud. A small smile touched his mouth, though it faded quickly. "It's quite old," he said. "Late 19th century, I think. Beautiful craftsmanship." He turned the ring gently beneath the light. The ruby flashed dark crimson. "Would you be willing to leave it with me for a few days?" I hesitated immediately. Anxiety rose so suddenly it startled me. I almost said no. The thought of leaving the ring behind made my chest tighten irrationally. Daniel seemed to notice. "I'll take good care of it," he said gently. Embarrassed by my own reaction, I agreed. That night I barely slept. Not because I dreamed, because I didn't. For the first time in weeks, he did not appear. The absence felt unbearable. I wandered the house restless and hollow, unable to settle. At around 3 a.m, I found myself standing in the upstairs hallway, listening to the wind move through the walls. And very clearly, from somewhere below me, I heard a man sigh. Soft, weary, lonely. My entire body went cold. I should have left the house then. Instead, I whispered into the darkness, "I'm here." The silence afterward felt almost relieved. The next day, I returned to the jewelry shop far earlier than necessary. Daniel glanced up from behind the counter as the bell chimed overhead. Something unreadable crossed his face. You came back quickly. I was nearby, I lied. He studied me for a moment before retrieving the ring from a small velvet tray. The instant I touched it, warmth spread through my hand. Not imagined warmth, physical warmth, like skin. I nearly dropped it. You all right? Daniel asked. Yes. But I wasn't, because suddenly the shop smelled faintly of cedar smoke, the same scent from my dreams. Daniel leaned against the counter carefully. There's something else, he said. His hesitation made me uneasy. I did a little research after you left. You researched the ring? It's distinctive, he replied. He slid a photocopied newspaper clipping toward me. The image showed a woman standing beside a man whose face had blurred with age. The woman wore the ring. Below the photograph ran a date from 1891, and beneath that, socialite vanishes days before wedding. A strange heaviness settled inside me as I read. Her name had been Vivian Ashcombe, daughter of a wealthy shipping magnate, engaged to marry a prominent businessman. According to the article, she disappeared less than a week before the ceremony. Some believed she drowned herself. Others claimed she fled. No body was ever recovered. I tried to laugh it off. That's unsettling. Daniel didn't smile. There were stranger stories, too. He sounded reluctant now. As in... He hesitated. Rumors, mostly. That she became withdrawn before disappearing. That she insisted she was in love with someone else. I felt suddenly nauseous. With who? That was the strange part. He paused. Apparently, no one ever saw him. The silence between us stretched. I forced another laugh. That's convenient for local ghost stories. Probably. But neither of us sounded convinced. Before leaving, Daniel said carefully, "If anything about the ring starts to feel wrong, you should probably stop wearing it." I looked down instinctively. The ring already sat on my finger. I didn't remember putting it on. After that, the dreams changed. They became more intimate, more dangerous. He no longer appeared only in ballrooms or gardens. Now he waited for me inside the house itself. My house, except transformed. The walls gleamed with candlelight. Fresh flowers filled crystal vases. Music drifted softly through every room. And he moved through it all, like someone returning home. Sometimes we spoke for hours beside the fire. Sometimes he brushed strands of hair from my face with unbearable tenderness. I stopped questioning whether he was real. Not completely, but enough. One night I asked him his name. He looked almost sad. "You already know me," he said softly. His voice had become clearer. Beautiful, low, intimate. I woke crying without understanding why. The ring tightened around my finger over the following weeks. Not physically, emotionally. Removing it became difficult. Whenever I tried, panic bloomed beneath my ribs. I would last an hour at most before putting it back on. Twice I woke to find faint red marks circling my finger like bruises. Meanwhile, the dreams consumed more and more of my waking thoughts. I began rushing through work simply to sleep again. Food lost taste. Daylight felt intrusive. Reality itself became thin around the edges. The house no longer seemed empty even during daylight hours. Sometimes, while reading, I would feel someone sit beside me on the couch, the cushion dipping gently under invisible weight. Once, while washing dishes, I saw a man's reflection standing behind me in the kitchen window. When I turned, no one was there, and yet I smiled afterward. That frightened me most. Not the haunting, the fact that I wanted him with me. Daniel started checking on me occasionally after that. Never intrusive. Just brief messages. How are you feeling? Did you learn anything else about the house? Sleeping all right? I answered less and less. Not because I disliked him. Quite the opposite. Being around him made reality feel embarrassingly solid. He represented electric bills, appointments, weather, ordinary life. And ordinary life had begun feeling intolerably distant. In dreams, I belonged somewhere magnificent, somewhere eternal. The proposal happened in December. Snow fell outside the dream house windows in slow silver spirals. Music drifted softly from another room. He led me into a candlelit parlor where firelight shimmered across dark walls. There was such sorrow in his expression that my chest hurt before he even spoke. "I have waited for you for so long," he whispered. His hand trembled slightly as he held mine. And then he knelt before me, not dramatically, not theatrically, almost reverently. When he asked me to marry him, it felt less like a question than the completion of something inevitable. I remember crying, not from fear, from relief. I said yes. The moment the word left my mouth, he slid the ruby ring onto my finger and kissed my hand so gently it broke my heart. When I woke the next morning, I was in my own bed. Winter light filtered pale and gray through the curtains. My hand flew immediately to my finger. Bare, no ring. I almost laughed from relief. It had only been a dream, a vivid one. Nothing more. Still shaken, I went downstairs to make coffee. Halfway through the kitchen doorway, I stopped. The porcelain trinket dish beside the sink was empty. The ring was gone. I don't remember screaming, but my throat hurt afterward. For the first time, genuine fear entered me. I called Daniel immediately. No answer. I tried again. Voicemail. The house creaked softly around me. Somewhere upstairs, footsteps crossed the hallway. Slow, measured, coming toward the bedroom. I fled downstairs before I consciously decided to move. The front door stood slightly open. Beyond it, snow drifted silently through the gray afternoon. And for one terrible moment, I had the overwhelming certainty that if I stepped outside, he would vanish forever. I closed the door instead. After that, I stopped fighting whatever was happening to me. Perhaps that sounds pathetic. Maybe it was. But exhaustion changes people. Fear becomes difficult to sustain when paired constantly with longing. And I loved him. Or believed I did. Maybe there's no meaningful difference. 3 mornings later, I woke with the taste of cigarette smoke lingering faintly in the air. Snow drifted softly beyond the bedroom windows. I remember feeling strangely calm, almost peaceful. Then I looked down. The ruby ring circled my finger. For a long time, I simply stared at it. I did not scream. I think some part of me had already known it would come back. The days that followed feel fractured in my memory now. Candles burning late into the night. Music threading softly through empty rooms. The sense of another body beside mine, beneath the blankets. Sometimes I would wake half asleep and feel fingers intertwined gently with my own. Never forceful, always tender. I began speaking to him openly, telling him about childhood memories, about loneliness, about all the small humiliations of being alive, and sometimes, God help me, I thought I heard him answer, not clearly, only fragments. Beloved, stay, soon. Daniel came to the house once. I almost didn't let him in. He looked exhausted when I opened the door. Wind-blown. Concern etched deeply into his face. You stopped answering. I've been busy. His eyes flicked immediately to the ring. You're pale, he said quietly. I'm fine. But my voice sounded distant even to myself. He stepped carefully into the foyer. The house seemed colder with him inside it, unwelcoming. I found more information, he said. I didn't want to hear it. He continued anyway. Vivian Ashcombe wasn't the only one. A terrible chill passed through me. There were others connected to the ring over the years. Women mostly. Isolation, withdrawal, delusions involving a man no one else could see. Stop. Samantha, don't. The way he said my name startled me. Gentle, human, real. For one dangerous moment, I almost burst into tears. Then somewhere upstairs, floorboards creaked slowly overhead. Daniel heard it too. We both froze. Another step, then another. His face drained of color. The house smelled suddenly of cigarette smoke. Not faintly this time, strong enough to sting the air. Daniel looked toward the staircase, and very softly, almost to himself, he whispered, Samantha, is someone else here? I couldn't answer, because I no longer knew. After he left, the dreams became beautiful beyond endurance. He showed me endless candlelit rooms, winter gardens beneath moonlight, grand halls filled with music and dancing figures blurred by golden light. But there was sadness now, too. Urgency, as though time between us was running short. You're afraid, I told him once. He touched my face with infinite tenderness. I'm afraid you'll leave. I won't. And I meant it. That realization should have horrified me. Instead, it felt peaceful. The wedding dress arrived a week later. I have no memory of ordering it. That's the truth. One evening, I opened the hall closet and found it hanging there inside layers of ivory tissue paper. Antique lace, high collar, long sleeves, elegant and impossibly old-fashioned. I should have called someone. A doctor, my sister, anyone. Instead, I touched the fabric with trembling fingers and thought, it's beautiful. The final days blur together strangely after that. I remember snow, candles, music, the house alive around me like a sleeping thing slowly waking. I remember standing before the bedroom mirror, wearing the dress, while shadows moved softly behind me in the reflection. And I remember no longer feeling lonely. Not even for a second. The last message I received from Daniel read, "Please answer me. I'm worried about you." I never replied. I think part of me knew he would come eventually. Perhaps I wanted him to witness it, or stop me, or understand. I'm not certain anymore.
A teacup sat beside the fireplace, steam still curling faintly from its surface. Fresh footprints marked the dust near the staircase. A single pearl hairpin rested atop the piano downstairs. "Samantha?" Still no answer. Only the music. Only the soft, settling creaks of old floorboards overhead. Upstairs, the bedroom door stood open. And there, spread carefully across the bed, lay the wedding dress. Ivory lace, long sleeves, antique silk. Arranged with such care, it looked less discarded than shed, as though someone had stepped out of it moments earlier. The room was cold. One of the windows stood slightly open, curtains shifting softly in the winter wind. I searched the entire property after that. Every room, the attic, the garden, even the cliffs beyond the house, with a flashlight trembling in my hand, while snow gathered across my coat and shoulders. But Samantha was gone. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, no blood, only absence. Police searched the shoreline for nearly 2 weeks afterward. Nothing was ever found except black seawater and broken shells along the rocks below the cliffs. Eventually, people settled on the explanations that made the most comfortable: mental breakdown, voluntary disappearance, suicide without recovery. I tried very hard to believe them. Months later, when the house was finally emptied, I handled much of it myself. Perhaps out of guilt. Perhaps because no one else wanted to enter the place again after dark. The kitchen was the last room I cleared. And there beside the sink, exactly where Samantha had first described leaving it, sat the ring, resting neatly on the porcelain trinket dish, waiting. I remember standing there staring at it for a very long time. The kitchen was freezing cold. Somewhere deeper inside the house, floorboards creaked softly. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the ordinary sound of an old house settling. At least, that was what I told myself. I should have destroyed the ring immediately, thrown it into the ocean, dropped it into a furnace. Anything. Instead, I wrapped it carefully in velvet and locked it inside the safe at the jewelry store beneath trays of sapphires and antique brooches. For a while, that felt sufficient. The police eventually stopped calling. People stopped mentioning Samantha's name around town. Life resumed its ordinary shape. Or tried to. But sometimes, after closing the shop at night, I would find myself unlocking the safe just to look at the ring again. The ruby seemed darker than I remembered. Not brighter, deeper, like wine held against candlelight. Once, while examining the setting beneath my loupe, I caught the faint smell of cigarette smoke. I searched the entire shop, thinking someone outside must have been smoking near the ventilation. The smell vanished before I found the source. After that came the dreams. At first they were subtle enough to dismiss. Music drifting through distant rooms. The sensation of someone walking just ahead of me through candlelit hallways. A woman's silhouette disappearing slowly around corners before I could see her face clearly. But unlike ordinary dreams, these lingered after waking. I would spend entire mornings carrying emotions I could not explain. Longing, grief, anticipation. Then one night I heard Samantha laugh softly somewhere in the dark. I woke instantly. My apartment stood silent around me, yet the sound had felt impossibly real. After that, the dreams became harder to ignore. Each night she appeared more clearly, standing beneath golden candlelight, wearing dark velvet. Her hair pinned softly back from her face, watching me with that same calm expression she used to wear while listening. She never looked frightened. That was what disturbed me most. Not trapped, not desperate, happy. For the rest of those days, reality itself began feeling strangely thin. Customers would speak to me, and halfway through conversations I would realize I had not absorbed a single word. At night I began hearing footsteps crossing the hallway outside my bedroom. Slow, measured. Once, very distinctly, I heard someone exhale smoke beside my ear while I lay awake in bed. I searched the apartment trembling, found nothing, and yet part of me was not afraid. That was the worst part. Because by then I understood exactly how Samantha had slipped so quietly into it. The haunting did not terrorize you. It comforted you. It learned the shape of your loneliness and filled it perfectly. Weeks passed. I slept less and dreamed more. Sometimes I caught movement reflected behind me in the shop mirrors. A figure in pale fabric crossing slowly between display cases. Always gone when I turned. One snowy evening, long after closing, I finally removed the ring from the safe again. The shop stood silent around me except for the ticking wall clock. The ruby caught the low amber light beautifully. I turned it carefully between my fingers, and for one impossible moment, I felt another hand close gently over mine. Warm, delicate, familiar. I jerked back violently enough to send a tray of gold chains crashing onto the floor. The sound shattered through the empty shop. My breathing turned ragged, but the feeling lingered. Not threatening, tender, like the memory of being touched by someone who loved you once. That night I dreamed of the ballroom for the first time. If this one got under your skin, there are more waiting. Subscribe to the leather-bound grimoire